is from some students from the St. John Fisher Sports Management Program. They're going to be reprising their presentation from the SABR Analytics Conference that happened earlier this month. Every year the SABR Analytics Conference hosts a competition amongst the schools. They're presented with a baseball operation question that they have to answer. It's a very short turnaround time for them. They get the question, I think it's what?
A week.
Yeah, a week prior to having to present it. So they have to do all of their research on it and formulate the presentation and get out to Phoenix within 7 days. So they do a phenomenal job with it. This year's topic was on optimizing hitter's launch angle, which probably whether you like it or not, I'm sure you guys are aware of all the StatCast data with exit velocities and launch angles and things like that. And I think that this really kind of shows where some of the data in baseball is going and how to translate it into performance on the field and things that players can do to try to optimize their performance based on what the data shows. So hopefully I didn't steal any thunder with doing that, but we'll leave it up to you guys. You have the mouse to click or arrows.
Perfect.
And I'm just going to dim the lights so some of the charts show up a little better.
All right, so he did do a great job kind of explaining what the case was. We did have two other guys that weren't able to make it today, but I'm Justin and this is Rob. So what they asked us to do was they gave us 6 players on a list, and then they said you have to pick 3 from the list and you're allowed to pick your own to determine like what their optimal launch angle would be. So we kind of looked at it from a situational hitting perspective. So we're going to kind of talk about the importance of that, the players that we ended up selecting, and then kind of what we did to justify our answer. So we created like a productive at-bat score, kind of how we got the data, what we created with the data, and then they asked us to project out some stats for our 3 selected players as well. And then we ended up presenting our findings in front of like a judges. I think our room had a gentleman from the Indians, the Red Sox, and MLB Advanced Media, guys who work with the StatCast data. So it was pretty nerve-wracking to present in front of them, but we'll let Rob kind of talk about our hypothesis.
So yeah, our hypothesis was launch angle can be defined by MLB, by the Major League Baseball official data definition, is the vertical angle in which the ball leaves the bat after being struck. So you can kind of look at this, it's 0 degrees straight, and then negative 90 to 90 is where it can go. One of the questions that they asked us to look into was the relationship between exit velocity and launch angle. So the actual speed is coming off the bat and the angle that it's moving. What we found throughout looking through different things and just in general, while thinking about it, is that while exit velocity has a ton to do with whether the ball is a hit, whether the ball in play is a hit at all, it doesn't have a huge impact on launch angle. Like they work together, but it doesn't determine launch angle. So yeah, our hypothesis to go about finding the optimal was to look at situational hitting. So what we found is that what we deduced is that there's 24 basic baseball situations. You can have 0, 1, 2 outs, and then 0 through 3 runners on base, 3 out possibilities, 8 base running possibilities, it ends up being 24. And to justify that we did this, it wasn't just us thinking about assuming that players did this. We did find a quote from Trevor Story, a player on the Rockies, that a lot of times less is more. I take a deep breath and just say shoot, meaning ball up the middle.
So these were the 3 players we selected. They all had the exact same exit velocity. They all hit the ball on average 88.4, I think roughly 88 miles an hour. And then we picked Joey Gallo as our wild card because we thought we could kind of save Joey Gallo from becoming like a Chris Carter type player who hit 40 home runs but went unsigned by the Yankees until almost the start of spring training. So what we looked at was for each player some of the basic stats. And then over here, this graph, the black dots are outs, the green dots are hits, and the red dots are home runs. And it's a byproduct of exit velocity and launch angle. So basically, the harder you hit it, and the closer to, this is 0 and this is 50. So the harder you hit the ball, the more likely you are to get a hit, obviously. And then here is about 25 is like the sweet spot for a home run. So like Mookie Betts, he kind of was a well-dispersed graph. You'll see on some of our other players that, like Gallo, almost everything is up, fly ball. He almost never hits the ball on the ground. But Bats and our other player, Jackie Bradley too, they're able to kind of, I guess, spray the ball better, or just they take a different approach at the plate. And it is worth noting too that his like ground ball fly ball ratio is 1.5, meaning so for every fly ball he hits 1.5 grounders. So he hits the ball on the ground more often. So you'll just kind of see how that's important as we move through. But Rob, talk about our Rangers.
Yeah, so we also, in addition to picking 2 Red Sox, we picked 2 Rangers, just so we can keep interesting ballpark comparisons and stuff like that. One of the players is Rougned Odor. He's got a pretty low batting average, not a great on-base percentage, but his ground ball fly ball ratio is about 1. So he's really consistently all over the place, essentially, is that he's not getting a ton of hits, but it's even between ground balls, fly balls. We thought his launch angle would be pretty interesting. Also interesting launch angle, Joey Gallo, who almost exclusively hits home runs. Ground ball fly ball ratio is 1/2, so he's hitting half as many ground balls to every fly ball. And you look at his graph, it's smaller sample size, he just hasn't been in the league as long, so it's less things to draw from. But it's basically all, I mean, the amount of dots below 0 degrees, I mean, down at all is, you know, half or less to all of the balls he puts in play up higher. Yeah.
And then just this one over here, just closer to me, is, so this is like a distribution of his at-bats. The big one is strikeouts, so most of his at-bats end in a strikeout. And so it goes strikeout, walk, fly out, and then the next one is home run. So he is, by definition, kind of a home run or nothing type hitter. So then we created a score to kind of justify productive at-bats. So
yeah, so in order to find our optimal launch angle, we need to find out what the launch angle at which the most productive at-bat comes from. Where they hit the ball, the angle they hit the ball, that the most productive results are. So we kind of coded every, because in our data that we had, it was just lines and lines of every single swing in baseball since 2015, 16, 17. So we coded each line as 2 with a home run and 1 for all other hits. So if you hit the ball in play and you got a hit that wasn't a home run, we coded it as a 1 and a 2 for a home run. And then if there was a run scored on the play, someone got in, or obviously a home run, bumped it up a little bit, we added 1 to it. For outs, we looked at, we needed to address the problem of a productive out, that when there's someone on third, it's not the best idea to just hit it into the ground if there's an out to give. So we said if a runner advanced on an out, we added 0.1. If a run scored, we added another 0.1. The reason it's like we divided all the scores by 10 just because we figured that as much as a productive at-bat is nice, it will never be as productive as a hit just because it's an out. Yeah.
So then here's how we got the data. Rob kind of already touched on it, but StatCast has every ball in play. We started with 15, so we had 15, 16, 17, 3 years. And like this is what it gives you outside of all the numbers. Like it gives you the exit velocity and stuff like that, but it was kind of a pain to be honest. So this is like a sample. Josh Donaldson doubles on a sharp line drive to center field, Devin Travis to third. So like we had to create a program that like it would scan this description, and like anytime it saw the word doubles, like we were able to create so it would tally up a hit. So then again we would do the same thing for the productive out. So at the end we would just be able to sum up our columns, and we have a score, like our score, on every ball that was put in play from 2015 and 17, which we thought is pretty cool. And then we eliminated bunts, so it kind of messed up the data. Like just the exit velocity of a bunt is kind of meaningless to measure. Like it doesn't really matter. It doesn't gel with our data. Like when we're trying to determine, okay, how hard does the player hit the ball while he's bunting? So it's not really the most important thing to use for us. So then Rob will touch on kind of our acronyms that we created.
So we found that each player has an average launch angle, ALA, for all 24 different situations. They're very different. It ranges quite a bit from like -20 to 20 on average, which is pretty big variation. So then we created a weighted average launch angle, which we have affectionately named WALA. It's the optimal launch angle for each situation based on what the player has done. So it is an average. So the equation there just means that we multiplied the launch angle by the productivity score. So outs, unproductive outs were 0, home runs were 2, were coded as 2. So multiplied that, and it was just a huge weighted average by each situation. Each player will have their own individualized WALA based on hitting tendencies and situational approaches. So if you're going out there and you're consistently finding success hitting fly balls in a given situation, your weighted average launch angle is not going to be what necessarily be the best weighted average launch angle in a different situation, just given the differences of what you're trying to do.
Right, and we kind of, we'll touch on the judges a little bit. They kind of grilled us on, well, why isn't it just always 25? Like, why isn't it always what's a home run? But the way this worked is it looked back on what they did. So like if they don't hit, a player doesn't hit a home run in every single at bat. So like it looks back on what happened and then what was the most productive for that player. So like you'll kind of see as we go through each of our players here. So like with no on and 2 outs, Mookie Betts doesn't hit a ton of home runs. So with no on and 2 outs, he got the most hits and the most productive at bats, hitting it at about a 10-degree angle, which is a line drive effectively. So like a line drive single. So these are just some of the interesting situations. When we presented, we did have a big sheet of every situation for every player that we gave to the judges. But so like you can see here, like first and third with no outs, Betts does really well. So his average is 22 and his best is 21. So he's within 1 degree every time, whether in that specific situation. But then he's not as good with 2 outs. So it makes sense because with 2 outs, there's no productive out to be had. If you make an out, the inning's over. So we weren't surprised to see that 23, which would effectively be a home run or a double, was his most productive. And then to look at Bradley, we thought Bradley is capable. He can kind of take more risks. He doesn't strike out very often, but what we found was that he can be more free swinging, with 2 outs. So basically, it'd be okay if he were to strike out on occasion a little bit more often if he were to try to go for maybe more of a home runner to take a Joey Gallo type approach, which we thought that was interesting. Like even the best players, they could strike out more, and that's the way the game is going. But there's an inherent risk with launch angle. The relationship is like this. So as your launch angle increases, your strikeout frequency increases, and that's pretty well accepted all across baseball. And Gallo is a great example of that, as you'll see in the next couple slides.
So Ruben Odor kind of confirmed our suspicion that he is consistently all over the place. The amount of categories in which he was about at his best launch angle were very few. Most of them had a difference that was pretty reasonably large. It's just the fact that he is a free swinger and he needs to. It's kind of apparent that he needs to rein it in a bit. A lot of his averages are higher than they should be. Obviously, like we got second and third with 1 out, he's hitting it way higher than he should. And third and 1 out, he's hitting it way higher than he should too.
And this was kind of our like aha moment when we realized that what we have might actually be kind of good. So with 1 out and a runner on third, he had his most success at a negative 1.4, which is effectively a ground ball. So score the run from third. But then if he hits it at a 1.4 with 2 outs, like I mentioned earlier, the inning's over. So no run can score. So the jump with the same situation, just a different changing the outs, results in a 25 or so degree launch angle change, and we were glad to see that it was close to 25 again, because a runner on third with 2 outs, the most productive thing to do, well, that would be to hit a home run. So with 23, it made perfect sense to us that when we saw that. And then Gallo is kind of a wild card.
Joey Gallo is had an interesting. As soon as every time it seems like he thinks he needs to hit a fly ball, it is very, very, very much so a fly ball. So he goes, straight, essentially as high as you can hit it until it's just a fly ball. And all of his optimal launch angles, all of his best, all the places that he has the most success are, 13 or above, 15 or above. Meaning that he doesn't have a ton of success consistently, but when he does, he tries to hit a home run so badly that it ends up being essentially a home run hit.
So then they asked us to, as another part of the case I know I touched on earlier, to project out some of the players' stats. So this is kind of what we created to do that, to kind of predict their batting average based on what their optimal launch angle would be.
So yeah, so we calculated the hit percentage for each situation, the literal amount, like percentage of times that the ball in play is a hit for every situation, regardless of player, for all players. So what this graph is here is that this axis is launch angle, and this axis is hit percentage. So basically, as the launch angle increases, the percentage of balls that are in play that are hits varies a lot. What we found in this little bottom corner here is those essentially swinging bunts, the balls that get hit straight down into the ground and happen to be hits just because the fielders can't get to them. But as soon as you get into like real hits, it's a pretty clear movement along the movement of the graph, and there's an optimal of about 12. And I think it's been floated around in like media and stuff loves to talk about how 25 is the best launch angle. So why is our clear peak at 9 to 15? It's because this is just hits. It's not home runs. This is literally you get the most hits when you get into this angle. When you get into this like range of angles, like 9 to 15-ish. Like that's the highest hit percentage. The graph in the bottom left is just the different colors of the different situations. We just included that to show that even though what you're trying to do and the averages vary a ton within situations by players, the distributions and everything, it all works out to be about the same. You're always trying to do about the same thing, and it always ends up being the distributions end up being about the same.
Right. So like the visual is 25 degrees is a home run, and 12 degrees is a line drive single up the middle, is pretty much the one sentence summary of what we found there. So then what they asked us to do was to predict what the batting average would be. So we kind of took a fun approach to this, and we said, well, if the player were perfect every time, what would they hit? And keep in mind, perfect is not a home run every time. It's what would lead to the most productive
They are
thing.
best at, yeah.
So like for the Rubio Odor, when his best was a -1, you're not going to get a hit hitting the ball at a -1 all that often. That's why the batting averages aren't 1,000. So like with that -1, we would then go back to the chart that we had in the previous slide and just kind of line it up and say, okay, well that's your hit percentage at -1, and then we just summed them all up. And so Betts, he's the best hitter, so his perfect average would be 500. So basically he would always make a productive out or get a hit. And then with Gallo though, the way he hits the ball, his optimal launch angle is almost always a fly ball, which if it's not a home run, they're probably going to catch it. So his best case is only a 279, which is why we think like he can change his approach at the plate in certain situations where just like hit a ground ball or try to hit a ground ball to move a runner instead of striking out. I mean, these are major league hitters. Like, I mean, I played baseball in high school, and I know, like, the guy in third, I was able to hit a ground ball. Like, the major league hitter should at least be able to, in their head, change his approach. Not necessarily, we wouldn't necessarily tell him, okay, Joey, you have to swing 10 degrees less this time. Like, that's not how you would use this. We would just tell him to just say, it's okay here to hit a ground ball. You don't have to hit a home run every single time.
Yeah. And then the cool part about this, just to add, is that we're not telling them to, because a lot of people, a lot of baseball players have come out and said, like, this is stupid, you're telling us to change our own, like, muscle memory, like, it's wrong. But the cool thing about this is that we're not telling them to change their muscle memory. This is based on what if you tell a player, like, we tell Joey Gallo, like, you need to hit it down a little more, it's because you're better at that. Like, we found it's not that you would be better, it's like you have done better when you're hitting at this launch angle, so you should probably do that. And you can, obviously. But we didn't really like the optimal launch angle batting averages projections, is what they asked for, but we found like it was a little ridiculous at 500, no one's ever going to hit 500. So what we looked at instead was room for improvement, what we call room for improvement. It's the difference between their personal optimal in any given situation and what their actual launch angle is in that situation. So the absolute value of the difference, meaning that it's, don't take into account negatives, just the actual average difference. So we call average room for improvement. We have actually named ARFI, second fun acronym for this. It's the average distance in degrees from their optimal launch angle. Literally, like, is their from their personal optimal launch angle.
It's how much they need to change
Exactly.
to optimize.
At their best. Yeah. This is basically how far they are from their own best. Yeah. So the Mookie Betts and Jackie Bradley, not terrible. They're already very good hitters, obviously. Odor, we said, free swinger, again reaffirming that he's a pretty free swinger and he has a lot of room for improvement. And Joey Gallo, very interestingly, not a lot of room for improvement. meaning that what he does is successful so little, like so infrequently, that even if he was at his own perfection, he wouldn't even be hitting a reasonably good batting average. So that was an interesting little thing.
And then this is just kind of, again, just to touch it, to kind of wrap it up with our summary. We just think that it's the best is a visualization of batter tendency. I know I touched on it earlier. We're not going to tell, you wouldn't use this to tell a player to change by 10 degrees. It's just, okay, we can look at Joey Gallo, and regardless of situation, he's almost always hitting the ball in the air, which we would argue is not always the right thing to do. But with Betts, Bradley, and even Odor, ironically enough, Bradley's almost dead on with the 12 degree, being the most likely to get a hit. So we would just kind of tell Bradley, you're doing a good job. Whereas a player like Gallo and Odor, we felt that this type of information would help them become a better hitter, and it would help managers use their players more effectively. So then they asked us kind of what we would have done if we had more than a week to do this, or kind of a new way to build on this. We kind of would have looked into a ballpark factor, so like in what percent of parks would Joey Gallo's fly balls have been home runs, but that would have gotten into physics, which actually at the presentation, StatCast gave a really, really cool presentation that kind of did that. So it was cool to see in the physics. I had no idea how to do that, so we weren't able to do that. And then two, we would look at a close game measure. So when the score's 10-1 and a runner's on third, the hitter's probably not going to try and hit a ground ball to make it 10-2. But in the ninth inning of a tie game, and 1 out and a runner on third, that run is a lot more important than scoring a run when it's a blowout game. And then we could have looked at the pitchers, so like lefty, righty, how important that was, and even the pitch type too. So maybe we could have found a trend that on changeups, Joey Gallo hits it at this angle, but on fastballs, he only hits it at this angle. And then the productivity score, we were kind of data driven.
Restricted,
yeah. We were restricted by the data. So like moving a runner from first to third, the way the run is coded, the way the data was coded, just says 2/3. It didn't say like the runner didn't move. There's no difference in our score if the runner moved from second to third or first to third. And that was kind of the data. I would change the way StatCast reports their data. But that,
which was not really an option 3
No.
days ago.
and then Rob will touch kind of on what future plans we would have with this and what we think teams could do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought this was really cool, and there's a lot of places for this to go. One of the biggest ones we thought would be interesting is like look at the actual importance of situational hitting. Obviously, it's what players are trying to do. We found it pretty reasonably significant that they were trying to do very different things by situation. I mean, the difference in launch angle were crazy. Even from what you guys saw, just the few examples we included. So yeah, we could look at, is it actually better, or should they be trying to do something different, or in reality, should they be just trying to getting it at 12 degrees, or should they be just trying to hit a home run every time? It would be an interesting question to research if we have all of the data. Interesting front office capability that we thought of was that you could look at players in this lens as like additional information. You could look at a player with a ton of room for improvement. You could say, well, they've had a lot of success at a certain angle, but they are consistently hitting it at the wrong one. Like, they are not doing their best. And because of that, their average is really low and they're not getting paid very much. And a front office might say, like, hey, if we acquire that player, pay them very little, and just stick a hitting coach on them, like, that's a potential difference maker in the playoffs. I mean, it's never going to be an all-star, but that's an interesting little concept that we thought might have interesting capabilities.
So then when we finished, the judges got 10 minutes to kind of pick the whole thing apart, and they did a pretty good job at that. So we opened it up to any questions to them, so we'll do the same here if anybody has any questions or clarifications.
I have a question. I'm not familiar enough with those players, but the difference between a left-handed batter and a right-handed batter. I'm left-handed, I hit both ways, and I know when I bat right-handed, I swung the batter differently, and then I do left-handed.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have different stats for how.
Yeah.
They're almost two different hitters.
Yes.
We very carefully made sure to pick players that weren't switch hitters because we knew, like, yeah, that's gonna.
And then
I'm
I
sure
can
it would.
see how you can use this, like, I'm playing against you, and I can see then your tendencies for a situation. I can get a feel for what I think you're going to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what we were thinking too, is like, with the way the pinch hitter used now, it's almost like, well, we're gonna trot this guy out there, he's gonna try and hit a home run, and more often than not, he's not gonna hit a home run. But we were thinking, like, if you have Joey Gallo coming up in a close game, and you need to move a runner, maybe you shouldn't have Joey Gallo hit, like, maybe you should have somebody hit in his place, because, I mean, sure, he might not hit a home run like Joey Gallo would, but we saw the percentages. Joey Gallo's gonna strike out a lot more often than he's gonna hit a home run. So like, we were thinking like, maybe there could change the way a pinch hitter was used.
Like see a guy that like, hey, there's a guy on second and third, and we have 2 outs, and we need to move a runner. Like this guy's had a lot of success at a good angle. Interesting.
In one of your last slides, I think it was the in summary slide, you mentioned that the optimal overall launch angle for all hitters, sort of, I think it was just your sample set was 15 degrees. Do you guys have any idea how that changes with the player's overall like physical capabilities? So a guy like Ben Revere physically can't hit a home run, like maybe once in his career. Well, you know, like what's the min-max shift?
We didn't look at that. That would be very interesting. We just found that for all players, not actually all players, all swings, that was the optimal at about 12. We didn't look at physical capabilities just because we kind of talked about it, but we felt that was a level of detail that once we crossed, we would have to do a lot more work. So we just realized, like, hey, let's just look at everyone in general and then look at them personally.
But like to your point, I think you're right. Like I think his graph would be different than the 12.
Right.
Just because of
Everything at like 25 degrees would be a fly ball.
Right.
So-
Right. Because he's like you said, he's not often going to hit a home run because he's like my size.
So his optimals would be a lot lower, naturally.
Now, the teams you compete against, did they do the exact same thing you did?
Way different.
Yeah.
No, I mean, they.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the same problem.
Same
yes.
problem.
Oh,
I
yes.
mean,
Yes.
Okay.
The winner had, we kind of are going to bash models, but they created like a model that you were able to input. It kind of it was like a predictive hits model, so like you would input this information and then it would tell you like this % of the time it's a single, this % of the time it's a double. And we, before the competition started, we said the winning team is going to do this.
Yeah.
And they're probably going to be able to do it better or different than we would do it. So we went with a totally different approach to it. And I think, I mean, we didn't win, but I think it worked. We had people after the fact, they had like a networking event there, and people after the fact came up to us and asked like about our idea and kind of what they thought of it. And then I was laughing really hard. The winners at the conference got to present on the following day in front of the entire conference. And somebody from the crowd, the question they asked was, did you look at the importance of situations? Like, how does it change depending on the situation? I wanted to run up on the stage and give our presentation. But it was, I think it would have been cool.
Had your hand out right
Yeah. And I think, I'm sure at some point, if they had more than 7 days to do it, they would have touched on it. I mean, it was a brilliant presentation, but it just goes to show that there's so much you can do with
When you have every swing in baseball, it's a lot you can do with it.
I'm just amazed when you show those charts, those bell curves and everything, and where those balls are just flying out, and everybody has that
Yeah.
available. And that's out there?
Yeah. Yeah, the StatCast, it's just on a website, you can download it.
Yeah.
How long has that been doing that? I mean, you got every.
2015. 2015, 16.
Okay.
And they want more, like they want more, whereas like I do a lot of work in hockey, and like they have nothing, and then baseball has anything that you could want. So it's certainly telling too now, like Eric Hosmer didn't get signed for how long. If you were to just look at his basic numbers, you think teams are crazy for not signing him, but you look at his more advanced numbers and
Got some pitfalls,
yeah. So.
Thank you guys very much.